Hello mathematicians. Today's video is on solving expressions using substitution. So our objective is students will be able to solve expressions using substitution. So go ahead, copy that down in your notes, and when you're ready, press play. See the video. Alright, so we're doing objective 121 today, which is solving using substitution. One of the most important things that we're going to do when we solve using substitution today is use parentheses. So the key point that I want you to remember today is this. When we substitute, we are going to always use parentheses. We are going to always use parentheses. Now, and parentheses are extremely important. And just to show you and prove to you how important they are, I want you to take a minute and I want you to do this next part right here, okay? It says, trust us. Plug each of the following into your calculator. Be sure to plug in exactly what you see. So I want you to plug in each of these examples on your calculator. If it has parentheses, plug them in just how you see them. So take a minute, pause the video, and plug each of those in. Alright, when you plug in these different answers, you should have seen that you got different things depending on where the parentheses were. On that first one, we have -3 inside of parentheses and square on the outside. We should have gotten 9. When we have the negative on the outside of the parenthesis and a square on the outside, we get a -9. When we have -3 squared, we also get a -9. Okay. The reason for this is order of operations. If we look at this first example, we have something like parentheses -3 squared. What this is saying is, I want you to do -3 times itself 2 times, which is a +9. When we have something like 3 squared, you can't see it, but in front of that parenthesis, there is an invisible 1. And so if we follow order of operations, we're going to do the exponent before we multiply, so we would end up getting 3 squared, which is 9, times -1, which is -9. On this last example, this one's a little bit harder to conceptualize, but again, we're going to do the exponent first, which is 9, and then apply our our negative. So every time we are substituting, parentheses are extremely important. As you can see here, depending on where we put the parentheses, we get different answers every time. So let's go through a couple of examples. I'm going to zoom in on this first example. It says simplify 4r minus r when r equals 8. All right, so first of all, we're given that r equals 8. So what I like to do and what I want you to do when you're substituting is rewrite the problem with just parentheses, no numbers. Okay? So something like 4. I'm not going to write an r. I'm going to put parentheses. Minus. Instead of an r, I'm going to put parentheses. I want you to notice that anything that was there beforehand is still there. Okay? I left it there. Notice I brought the subtraction sign down. I brought the 4 down. Now, I'm going to substitute in my 8 where the r's would be. So I'm going to put 8 in my parenthesis, 8 in my parenthesis. And now I can go ahead and evaluate this expression using order operations. 4 times 8, remember when 4 touches a parenthesis like that, it means multiplication. 4 times 8 is going to give me 32. Minus 8, okay, 32 minus 8 is going to give me a 24. So the answer to this expression is 24. All right, let's do another example. Let's go ahead and move over to example 2. says evaluate 3D plus CD2 when C equals 4 and D equals negative 3. Okay, so now we're given two variables, C equals 4 and D equals negative 3. Again, I'm going to take the expression and I'm going to rewrite it with just what's there and parentheses whenever I see a letter that I'm going to substitute. So I'm going to put a 3. I know that when 3 touches D, that means that they are being multiplied. So I'm going to put parentheses here. Plus, I'm not going to write a C, I'm going to put a parenthesis for C. Then I'm going to put another parenthesis for D. Now, important key point, and I want you to write this key point in. We'll write it right above here. Your exponent, okay, so put a little key point here. Your exponent goes on the outside. The exponent is going to go on the outside. So notice we have C times D squared. We're going to put that exponent on the outside of the parenthesis. Okay, because we're only substituting in the variable itself. We are not substituting in an exponent. That exponent's going to go on the outside. So now what we're going to do is substitute in our variable. So a C, first I'm going to do all the C's. C was a positive 4. So this first parenthesis corresponds to D. I'm not going to put that there. This second parenthesis corresponds with C. So I'm going to put a 4 there. My other two parentheses corresponded with a negative 3. So I'm going to put negative 3 in for D. Right, now I can go ahead and evaluate this. First thing that I should do is exponents. Okay, notice I have an exponent down here. Negative 3 squared is a positive 9. Notice how important those parentheses are, because if we would have not put them, we would have gotten a negative 9. I'm going to bring down my 4. Okay, now I notice I have only multiplication left, so I can go ahead and do that. 3 times negative 3 is negative 9. 4 times 9 is 36. And now I can just add negative 9 plus 36 gives me 27. Okay. Now, I'm doing this piece by piece using order of operations. We can also, and this is when our calculator is really a helpful tool, we can also just put this right into our calculator. So if I were to put in my calculator negative parentheses negative 3 plus parentheses 4 times parentheses negative 3 squared, okay, I get 27. So I'm doing my math right by hand, but you can also use your calculator as a tool. All right, we're going to do a couple more examples. Let's look at this next example, example 3. So it says, simplify a squared minus parentheses b to the third minus 4c if a equals 7, b equals negative 3, and c equals 4. Okay, now we're dealing with 3 different variables. So again, your first step should be to write out your expression without numbers or letters, just using parentheses. So I have A is my first one. I'm going to use parentheses for that. Remember our key point from last time, put the exponent on the outside. Minus. I'm writing that minus down because that was there to begin with. Minus. Parenthesis. Now, this is the first problem we've had parentheses. If that parenthesis is there to begin with, we are also going to write it. And I'm going to write another new set of parentheses for my B. Okay? I'm going to put my cubed on the outside. Minus 4. I need to put some parentheses for C. Now, this parenthesis right here was there to begin with, so I'm going to write that on the outside. I want you to notice, this parenthesis and this parenthesis are right here and right here. Those were there to begin with. I rewrote them. When I wrote out parentheses to substitute in my numbers, I had to create new ones. All right, now I'm going to substitute in my numbers. A was 7, so I'm going to have a 7. B was negative 3, so I'm going to have a negative 3. And C was a positive 4. Now I'm going to go ahead and evaluate. First, I want to do what's inside my grouping symbols, and I notice that I have an exponent in the outside, so I'm going to do that first. So we have a negative 27, okay, and then 4 times 4 is going to give us a negative 16. I'm going to bring down my 7 squared, and 7 squared is 49, okay. Now, we could enter this whole thing into our calculator, or we could evaluate it piece by piece. Let's do what's inside our grouping symbol. So negative 27 minus 16 is going to give us a negative 43. I'm going to bring down what I had in front. 49 minus negative 43 is going to give us a positive 92. We can also, again, use our calculator to check this. So if we did 7 squared minus negative 3 cubed minus 4 times 4, we get negative 2. So we did that correctly. All right, we're going to do a couple more examples, especially some that are starting to look a little bit different. So example 4, it says, what is 58 degrees Fahrenheit in Celsius if C equals 5/9 F minus 32. So, in this instance, we're given a formula. So we're answering the question, what is 58 degrees Fahrenheit given this formula? Now, usually you can assume that if C is Celsius and F is Fahrenheit, so if we're looking at this equation, we know that 58 degrees Fahrenheit in Celsius, we know that F is going to equal 58. So our thing that we're substituting into our expression is 58. So what I first want to do is I'm going to rewrite my expression using parentheses where I see an F. So C equals 5/9 parenthesis. Notice this parenthesis was here to begin with, so I'm also going to repeat that here. And I'm going to use another set of parentheses for my F minus 32, close parenthesis. I'm going to go ahead and substitute 58 in for F. Okay. Now we should do what's inside the parentheses first. So 58 minus 32, it's going to give us a positive 26. I know when I have 5/9 is touching a parenthesis like that, that means that it's being multiplied. So I'm going to multiply 26 times 5/9, and we get 14.4 repeating. So C is going to equal 14.4 repeating. And let's go put it in our units. This is going to be degrees Celsius. Okay. As you can start to see, using parentheses is extremely important, especially when we're dealing with negative numbers, especially when we're dealing with exponents. So we want to continue to do that. All right, two last more examples. Let's look at example number 5. So we have if A equals negative 4 and B equals 4, go ahead and solve this one. All right, again, if it's there to begin with, we are going to rewrite it. So I see a square root symbol. I'm going to rewrite that, square root symbol. I see a negative right here. I'm going to rewrite that, or a minus. I see an A on top, so I'm going to put parentheses for my A over parentheses for my B. Now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put in my numbers. A was negative 4. B was 4. Now, let's talk about how you would evaluate something like this. Because you have division here and the negative is touching on the outside, it's kind of like you assume that there's these imaginary parentheses around this, and on the outside you have this negative 1 coefficient. Okay? So the first thing we want to do is divide negative 4 divided by 4. So I'm going to rewrite what we have. We have a square root on top. I'm going to bring down this negative, and negative 4 divided by 4, that gives me a negative 1. Now remember, on the outside of this parenthesis, we have a imaginary -1. We're going to multiply those two things first before we square root. So -1 times -1 gives me 1. Okay? Your square root's kind of like a grouping symbol, so we have to do everything on the inside of it first. And what is the square root of -1? Or I'm sorry, of 1, the square root of 1 is 1. One last example, okay, and this one's very similar but without the square root symbol. It says simplify -a over b when a equals -4 and b equals 4. So again, we're going to have our negative parenthesis over parenthesis. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put -4 in for a and 4 in for b. Remember, it's kind of like you have these big imaginary grouping symbols on the outside. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to simplify that division. Okay, we're going to simplify -4 divided by 4, which is going to give us -1. But I'm going to bring down my negative sign, remembering that there's an imaginary coefficient of 1 in front of this parentheses. And what is -1 times 1? It is 1. All right, let's go ahead and try a couple practices. So on this next page, what I want you to do first is, I want to just really quickly try these first three, 1, 2, and 3 together before we do a couple more practice. So let's look at numbers 1, 2, and 3. I don't want you to put your numbers in yet. I just want you to set it up without parentheses. Go ahead, pause the video, try to set these up without parentheses, and then come back together and make sure that it's set up correctly before you start evaluating. Okay, these questions are the kind that I was talking about earlier where it's extremely important that we use parentheses, and it's extremely important that we rewrite what we had previous after that, right? So if we look at this first one, we have -5c squared. Remember, when the -5 and the c touch, that means that they're being multiplied. So I'm going to rewrite what I have, -5. Instead of having putting a c, I'm going to put my parentheses, and then I should have it squared. Okay, remember, we're just practicing setting them up right now. Make sure they're set up correctly. Inside of my c, I'm going to have a -3 because that is the value of c. Okay, let's check this next one. There's a negative here to begin with. We aren't just going to disappear that. We're going to put a negative here. For my b, I'm going to put parentheses, and my exponent goes on the outside. A common mistake that lots of students make is during the substitution process. If you look up here, it says b equals -2. They assume that since there's this negative right here, I don't write the negative twice. That would be incorrect. This negative that you see here went here. We rewrote that negative right there. When we substitute in b, I'm going to put parentheses for b, and then in my parentheses, I'm going to put -2. This last one, we should have a -4. Remember, when 4 and a touch, that means multiply, so I'm going to put my parentheses. And when a and b touch, that also means multiply. I'm going to put my parentheses. A is 2, and b was -2. All right, go ahead and pause the video again. I want you to evaluate these. When you're ready, press play, and you can see what the answers were. All right, here are your answers. Should have gotten 45 for 1, -4 for number 2, and 16 for number 3. All right, I want you to try a couple more practice just to make sure that we're kind of getting the hang of it. So what I want you to do is try these next 4 practices. So go ahead and try practice 4, 5, 6, and 7. Pause the video and then press play when you're ready. All right, here are the answers for the next 4 problems. So for number 4, you should have had 75. So number 5, you should have had -1. If you got that one wrong, remember that when you have something where you have a division bar, it's kind of like you have an invisible grouping symbol here on the top in the numerator and an invisible grouping symbol on the bottom. You have to do the entire top and then divide it by the entire bottom. Okay. Number 6, you should have gotten a negative 3 over 2. That happened because the negative 3 divided by a negative 2 gave you a positive 3 over 2, but then this negative out in front ended up making it negative again. And then number 7, you got 150. Right? That's the end of our video. Write down any questions that you might have and come to class ready to practice.